New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be exploring the fast-moving field of UFO disclosure, and I'm delighted that my guest today is Daniel Sheehan. He is author of The People's Advocate, the life and legal history of America's most fearless public interest lawyer. He has been involved in many prominent cases, including the Pentagon Papers, the Watergate burglary, the Karen Silkwood case, the American Sanctuary Movement case, and the Iran-Contra affair. He represented psychiatrist John Mack when he was being investigated due to his interest in apparent alien abduction cases. He is currently heading up an organization called the New Paradigm Institute that is launching an initiative to hold Congress responsible for UFO and UAP transparency. Danny is based in California, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Danny. It's a real pleasure to be with you again, especially at this time when so much seems to be happening in the UFO disclosure arena.
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is, Jeffrey. It just yesterday morning, when Tulsi Gabbard was being, interviewed by the United States Senate to confirm her becoming the new director of national intelligence. In her opening statement, she specifically stated that one of her top priorities is to get transparency on this whole UFO UAP issue. And Robert Kennedy, who it may also be coming onto the cabinet, has also made public statements now that he believes that it's a top priority. And Trump himself has said that along with the release of the JFK assassination documents, he believes that all the documents relating to the UFO and ET phenomenon should be made public. So, and now because of that, there's a lot more people that are deeply involved in the actual program that's been going on for downing the UFOs and recovering them and trying to back engineer their technology and stuff. So there's a lot of that. Jake Barber has come on, and there's a lot of the people. Also, Fred Baker. There's a number of people that have been directly involved in it that are now coming forward. Ross Colfar from Australia is doing lots of these interviews, bringing forward lots of the people that we've already presented to the Senate Intelligence Committee, and trying to lean on the Senate Intelligence Committee to bring these people forward publicly. So all of that is going on right here in the very first month of the administration of Donald Trump.
Well, what I find especially fascinating is that Jake Barber, a private contractor with a military and intelligence background, says that he now has venture capital financing to take this whole UFO retrieval operation out of government hands into the private domain and make his findings, to the extent that he can, public.
The latter part of that is good, to try to utilize private resources to get at this information and get it out from under the control of the military. But the problem is that the private aerospace corporations are the ones who are trying to keep it secret because they want to get patents on the technology with regard to the. And the problem is when you get into the private sector, one of the primary sources of funding in the private sector is the military. And, because they get cost plus contracts, they get billions of dollars of grants and stuff from the Defense Department. The House and the Senate will give the Department of Defense virtually any amount of money they ask for. And so that it doesn't necessarily accomplish what we're trying to do, is to pull this out from under the control of the military in the attempt to utilize the technology from the ETs, for weapon systems. Now in our areas that you and I talk about a lot, and the whole issue of consciousness and what the impact of the recognition of the existence of an extraterrestrial civilization, our relationship with them, what they portend for our future relationship, all of that stuff is what needs to be emphasized. So this isn't a commercial venture. This is a scientific and spiritual adventure that needs to be emphasized. And fortunately, Jake Barber, as you noticed, one of the primary aspects of his interview with Ross Coulthard, on the News Nation, was that he had this extraordinary experience of a consciousness, a dramatic elevation of his own personal consciousness when he encountered this craft that was apparently had extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional non-human life piloting it, and he was very candid about it, which is quite remarkable. Even for a special forces guy, these tough guys, he basically cried right on television when he was talking about what an astonishing, unique, and extraordinary experience it was to encounter this intelligence. So that helps.
I think Jake Barber coming forward is a milestone in this development. So we need to talk about his credibility and the credibility of the people around him.
Yes. Well, I'm going to find out a lot more about it. I know that I'd been talking with Ross earlier about the people that he was talking to. I didn't know what their names were. I had a general idea of what their general background was and what the kind of information is that they know about. But now that he's come forward publicly, and we know his name and everything, we're going to be spending a lot more time trying to direct attention to this consciousness dimension of what he's talking about. And so that virtually all the contacts that I've gotten since then, which are considerable, I've tried to emphasize this aspect of what it is that they're doing and try to make sure that in this, the funding that they have gotten, from this gentleman, a particular person, we now know who it is that is funding their private operation. I'm just hoping that we can steer people into this issue of consciousness and the whole metaphysical and geopolitical and philosophical domain that we need to look at, rather than everybody getting fixated on the technology and the kind of mechanics of the whole thing. But this is clearly a breakthrough, with them coming forward and now starting to provide video of some of the actual craft.
It seems like a major breakthrough, particularly in light of the fact that, to my knowledge, the Pentagon and the Aero office is still denying that any of this is real.
Yeah, that's true. It's quite extraordinary. I mean, they're locked right in. They've just gotten themselves attached to this particular way of handling it, and their credibility is just going down farther and farther. Now, with the change of administration, with the change of the people that are in charge of the defense, now to have a person in charge of the State Department, for example, with Rubio, that is very clearly acknowledging the reality of all of this, and they have an institutional interest in the State Department to get the State Department involved in figuring out what our diplomatic relationship is going to be with the extraterrestrial occupants of these craft, so that it's not just exclusively a military or intelligence operation. That's extraordinarily important. And when you have Tulsi Gabbard, assuming she's going to be approved as the Director of National Intelligence, she's going to try to shift away from, I think, this abuse of the classification system, to try to classify not just the technology, but to classify and keep secret the fact that there's an extraterrestrial civilization all around us. I mean, that's preposterous. That is not a national security issue exclusively.
Well, I assume they feel that the public isn't ready to handle it. It'll cause chaos and communication disruptions and make us vulnerable to our enemies, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, actually, they've been much more specific in my conversations with the people that are part of the secret keeping, is they've said they're afraid that it will undermine the present pillars of power in our culture. They start talking right immediately about the stock market. They start talking about our military prowess, the assertion of dominant military power over the planet that we exercise. It's all going to be undermined. That's hardly in keeping, at least, with higher consciousness, and so that type of threat that they're concerned about. I mean, when you check the polls, vast majorities of the younger generations are all convinced that there's an extraterrestrial civilization. That they're not traumatized by it. It seems like a perfectly natural thing to believe, and that they're starting to think about the beings from Alpha Centauri as being like Frenchmen, or Germans or Scandinavians. They're just farther away. And it is true that we have to navigate the kind of they keep referring to it as ontological shock of realizing that there is another highly intelligent, highly sentient, highly technologically developed, but distinctly non-human species. That this is that whole issue of us thinking that we moved from believing falsely that we were the center of the physical universe into believing that we were just the pinnacle of all sentient life in the universe. We've now been, I guess, dethroned, and that's what they're worried about. So we have to learn to be citizens with others rather than some sort of elite royalist class, in the universe. So that's just another transition that needs to be made now by our human family. We've made them in the past, and we'll make this one. We just have to do it in a constructive and peaceful way.
Well, when you bring up the question of power and who has power, it seems to me that we can call them aliens or ETs or extra-dimensional, or Ted Owens, a man I studied who had psychic abilities, called them the space intelligences, and did hundreds of demonstrations that he could interact with them and produce very, very powerful effects on hurricanes, tornadoes, and volcanoes. So it seems to me that really, whoever they are, they're the ones with the power.
Well, and of course, you can imagine how potentially traumatic that is to a major national security state apparatus, who believe that the mission of our intelligence community and our military is to establish full spectrum military dominance over the planet. That's traumatic for them to not be in that position any longer. And so that they have to move over into diplomatic negotiations and communications with the beings. That's the process that has to go on now, and that's why by having Marco Rubio over at State Department right now, who is such a clear person who has knowledge of the reality of this phenomenon, that's an extraordinary breakthrough, and even perhaps more so than the Jake Barber event. This event of Rubio being approved now to be the Secretary of State, who has been such a proponent of transparency on this issue, I think is one of the most important things that has happened, in this last period since you and I spoke last.
I recall the Israeli aerospace expert, I think his name was Eshed, if I recall correctly. He maintained that actual treaties or contracts or documents exist that the government, not just the U.S. government, but several governments have been in contact with these entities, whoever they are, and have engaged in agreements.
He did say that. He did say that. We're investigating that now at the New Paradigm Institute. We have very positive communications with Marco Rubio and his staff, who are many of them from his Senate staff will be shifting over now into the State Department, and so that we hope to gather much more information about that. And that's, again, a part of the trauma that they're afraid of, is saying, oh, look, if they've been having actual diplomatic communications with extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings, and they've been lying about that to the American people, that they're embarrassed about that at a minimum. They're also, I think, more structurally worried about losing authority over this domain. So this is something that I think that if we focus as a public interest community in shifting the kind of major center of gravity of dealing with this issue over into the State Department in diplomatic realms, we now have to engage the religious communities. We really need to engage the spiritual communities on the planet to start moving over into this area and starting to try to understand what the metaphysical and spiritual implications are of the dislocation of our human species, Homo sapiens, of not being at the pinnacle of all sentient life in the universe. That's an important step that I think you and I and others who come from a kind of a spiritual background have to try to focus on, while other people worry about a lot of other things that they're doing right now.
Well, if you had to put a probability, a percentage on the idea that there are actual, let's call them written agreements between governments and extraterrestrial organizations, how likely do you think that is?
I think that there are protocols that have been established. That's clear. I mean, that's 100% clear. That there are some kind of protocols that have been developed pursuant to which our especially our military forces and our intelligence gathering satellite systems, etc., have some kind of working relationship with not stepping on each other's toes right here. Now, as to how formal that is right now, as to exactly which agencies have, because it's not within their purview. It's not within the purview of the Central Intelligence Agency, for example, to be working out diplomatic relationships with with foreign powers. We're supposed to have a constitutionally structured government that does this, and so. But I think that it's absolutely certain that there are some kind of working protocols that have been established. What we need to do now is we need to kind of formalize these. And we need to involve the other people and other nation states on our planet in this process. We can't have the kind of superiority complex of the United States elite governing circles. I think that they are the ones that are going to be able to call the shots on this, that we really have to have some sort of geopolitical engagement. So that I think that the treaties that we have with each other here on our planet, among the 193 nation states that are part of the United Nations, need to come to grips with this right now, because they need to work out, we need to work out some kind of a unified sense of how it is we want to interrelate with these beings before we can engage in bilateral formalization of our relationship with them. Because you certainly don't want individual nation states establishing individual treaties with one or another of these species. That isn't the ideal way to proceed.
There have been reports, particularly from Jake Barber, that the government employs what he calls psionic assets. Typically, he's described these assets as persons, and typically they come from outside of the United States. They come from countries where they've been recruited, from societies where there is no hostility towards psychic functioning, and that these particular individuals, many of whom I understand are Native American, have the ability to interact with the occupants or with the vehicles if the vehicles themselves are conscious. And the interaction is telepathic in nature. It seems to me, as soon as you introduce the concept of ESP or telepathy, many of the fundamental principles upon which our legal system is based come into challenge.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about this. The worldview issue arises right away. And that you and I have talked about it before. That there's an entire octave spectrum of worldviews shared among our human family, and those that more integratively approach the issue of consciousness are going to rise into the ascendancy here. Those who are kind of steadfastly atheistic and radical materialist, scientific, logical positivists, are going to be more traumatized by this. Because they've been so emphatic and aggressive for so long about actively denying the reality of the conscious realm. But as you move into the progressive and utopian and spiritual worldviews, you're going to see more and more acceptance of this. And what we're talking about here, the Aboriginal people, the people who have not been kind of jammed into the scientific, logical, positivist worldview, have been engaging with this extra-dimensional, extraterrestrial consciousness for some time in their spiritual traditions. And because of that, they have developed this faculty of spiritual communion, which is, in my opinion, a faculty that I think I may have mentioned the story to you, maybe in private conversations, that back in 1968, when I had just come from Harvard College and had gone up into Harvard Law School, we got word that the professor of intellectual history at Harvard University was going to be delivering his final lecture, and he was asked, what the most important single human insight, intellectual insight, had been, in his opinion, of her teaching for 50 years at Harvard. And he said it was clear that what all of the greatest minds in our human family had come to realize, that we were right in the process of evolving to the next stage of our biological evolution, and that Homo sapiens sapiens was going to be evolving into a new species, and that the primary differentiation between the new species and this was the full flowering of this additional faculty. And it was the faculty that people refer to as extrasensory perception, but it had to do with telepathic communication. It has to do with precognition. It has to do with non-local communication, and all of this particular biological faculty, like seeing or hearing, enables some of our people to have direct, immediate experiential engagement with the unitive phenomenon that bonds every irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe into one unified harmonic whole. And there is an additional belief that beyond that, the next additional stage of evolution of our human family actually enables us to reach out and have direct, immediate experience of the infinite and eternal sea of completely undifferentiated consciousness that abides out beyond the sum total of mass and energy. in our physical universe, that there's an infinite and eternal sea of completely undifferentiated consciousness that simply abides. And this was the origin of the actual condensation of consciousness into the original unit of matter that has through this process of evolving, has evolved into our physical universe. Now, you and I have talked about these things, that this is an area where the Western traditions, the Western spiritual traditions, need to learn more from the Eastern traditions, even of Buddhism and Hinduism, and certainly shamanism, of the Aboriginal spiritual communities. And so this is going to be an extraordinarily exciting time, not only for scientists and for engineers and for historians, but also for people in the spiritual community. This is in my opinion is that given the pace of the information coming forward now, that there's almost no way that this is not going to start coming forward during the next 4-year period. You know, that there's the period of this particular administration. And so if in fact we can hold these members of the cabinet that are coming in under Trump and can hold Trump to their word, that what they're trying to do is fix our institutions to keep them from violating the Constitution and violating people's private rights and violating the law. If we can actually get the institutions to function the way the Constitution envisioned them doing, then the institutions will be strong enough to process this event that's happening here. So I think that this is extremely important. And to be frank, it wasn't entirely clear that if things had just continued to go on as normal, you know, with an additional administration of Joe Biden or even Kamala Harris, that was, let's keep on going the way we've been going, and allow that these kind of imperfections unto tragic failures of some of our institutions were being ignored, and the one of which is the whole bifurcation of the academic and intellectual communities in our universities from the spiritual realm. You know, in the entire bifurcation between spiritual insight and the laws and public policies of our nation states. You know, we have to go through a really radical adjustment here, I believe, in the next 4-year period. And that's why it's going to be so important for people to come together and to stop this kind of dialectical confrontation, not only between science and religion, but between the left and the right, between the Republicans and the Democrats, the Western civilization and Eastern civilization. This entire inclination to the dialectic, is basically that our culture is out of balance in the second chakra. That we're just locked into this dialectical dynamic. We have to understand that there's a higher manifestation of each of our chakras, so that there's a Taoist, relationship between the yin and the yang here, between the spiritual and the rational. That this has to we have to come to grips with this now. So I think this next 4-year period is going to be, while it's fraught with danger. I want to be clear about that. That I have no doubt whatsoever that there are significant indicia that this could go wrong here. That Donald Trump personally has a number of what I think are very serious character problems that could cause this to kind of gravitate toward kind of an authoritarian regime, where he would take advantage of the destabilization of the old structures in a way to increase his own personal power. Even under the point of potentially declaring a state of national emergency, wanting to suspend normal constitutional protections, even potentially invoking the continuity of government authority that has been authorized by Congress. We have to be careful about this, that those of us who are adherents to natural law principles need to reinforce the fundamental underlying natural law principles that undergird our Constitution here during this period of instability. So that's part of my role as an attorney and as general counsel for the New Paradigm Institute, to make sure that we safeguard these, that very importantly will protect the agency of our human species in dealing with the extraterrestrial universe. That that people are going to be tempted to abandon any kind of self-respect for our human family, to see that, oh, we're a million years behind, another civilization in our consciousness. That doesn't mean that we just succumb to being told what to do by them, or that they just substitute their view of reality for anything that we might think. So the maintenance of our agency as a species is going to be very important here. And I think that the safeguards of our Constitution are very valuable here in this period of disequilibrium. But we do need a period of disequilibrium to unstick some of these institutional flaws that we have. The national security state, the individual nation-state imperialism, the injustices of an uncontrolled capitalist system on the planet, crushing people and setting up huge, vast discrepancies between 0.1% of the population of our planet and the vast majority of our people. We have to overcome these differences of race and gender and national origins. This is an astonishingly rich opportunity that we have here, and that's how we should hold it. That's how we should view this, in my opinion.
One of the paradoxes that comes to my mind as you're speaking about this is that it seems to me that the societies that proclaim to be most open to the idea of communication with extraterrestrials are the indigenous peoples who have talked about it for centuries and seem to think of it in a matter-of-fact way. But these are the same people who very often have no laws, no courts, no police, no jails.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. But they also have no highways, they have no bridges, they have no so what we have to do, again, we have to try to establish a balance here. There are all kinds of amenities that are perfectly appropriate for our human species to have, and that I understand that some of the Aboriginal communities have eschewed basically any contact or communication with the kind of the more scientific culture, and they have foregone some of the benefits that can be derived because they think that the dangers are so profound. Because they see what's happened in our culture. And of course, the ET people have been telling us about this. The people that they've been contacting and having communications with, they say, look, there's some very clear things that you need to do. You've got to stop the nuclear weapons programs. You've got to get rid of these nuclear weapons because you're going to eventually, because of the bipolar dynamics you have going on between nation states, you're going to resort to thermonuclear war. And you can destroy the life-generating capacity of your planet. And the same thing with contaminating your planet with all these chemicals and effluents from your energy systems into your atmosphere. You're going to destroy the life-generating capacity of your planet. And let's be clear, the life-generating capacity of your planet is one of the important factors that's causing the extraterrestrial civilization to be so interested in your planet. Because, even though there are clearly other planets that gestate life, because they have done so. But the reality is that it's not an absolutely common feature of all planets in the galaxy, much less in the universe. And so that the preservation of this unique capacity that some planets have to gestate life and to support life in its evolutionary process, this is the fundamental dynamic of the universe. And it is sacred. This is a sacred dimension of our universe. And the Aboriginal tribes, place such emphasis on all of that they have actually consciously tried to avoid a culture that has begun to suppress that. But that we come out of the Western culture where the to try to discuss in the academies, in the universities. Remember what happened at Harvard University with Dr. John Mack, back in 1994, when he simply wanted to write and talk about this extraordinary encounter with extraterrestrial life and the effect that it had on the consciousness of our people. He was condemned basically by the university. They threatened to throw him out of the community, basically. And so that we have great progress that needs to be made in the universities and in the educational system of our children. This, as I say, it's extraordinarily important to have people get excited about this in a positive way. And I guess there's a difference that some people, human beings that stand out in a summer field and look up into the stars and see the overwhelming beauty and majesty of our universe, and are just enthralled at how joyous and wonderful this is. And some people experience it with complete fear and feel completely isolated, and what an overwhelming phenomenon the universe is. And so that we have to, without being patronizing, we have to be sympathetic to some people who have a more difficult time enjoying and accessing the more subtle dimensions of our consciousness that are able to resonate in harmony with the kind of unifying frequencies that exist in our universe. That's the kind of things that I know that you've devoted your life to. It's the pathway through which I have come into this issue of being at Jesuit National Headquarters back in 1977 when President Carter came to office. And one of the first things he demanded was finding out about what the ET and UFO phenomenon is all about. That's how I ended up becoming professionally involved in this at Jesuit headquarters. And we proposed to the 54 major religious denominations in the United States back in 1977 that we set up a special task force to figure out how to prepare for this. And yet they didn't want to do it at that time. But I think now people are more and more open to this. And I think that your institute and the work that you're doing at the academic level and the work we're doing at the New Paradigm Institute are absolutely integral to the success of this program. That's why I enjoy getting to meet with you regularly and keep us posted on how we're all doing on this.
Thank you. I enjoy it as well. I'd like to go back to the Jake Barber story. It's fascinating how this man who really spent his life as a warrior and a very tough fellow, he says he's always armed wherever he goes, and has faced many life-threatening situations, was brought to the point of tears when he encountered what he believes was an authentic non-human craft that he was hoisting on his helicopter. But at the same time, he also acknowledged that the program he was involved in used microwave pulse weapons to shoot UFOs down out of the sky so they could be captured. And apparently the psionic assets, these human beings, are involved in some sort of a program to control the UFOs with their own consciousness, get them to land, and where they can also be captured.
That's right. No. This is fairly frightening. this kind of the commandeering of people who have these kind of subtle psychic capabilities to setting up what they refer to as the honey trap. To kind of send out signals. Oh, we're here. We love you. Please come. Please come. And then when they come near them, try to knock them out of the sky and capture them. And according to some reports, actually kill the beings that are on board. I have direct information that's happened in the past. This is, now obviously I would assume that the extraterrestrial beings that travel sort of extra-dimensionally here to our planet, that they're sophisticated enough to realize this is like highly undeveloped species act sometimes. So, they're not going to hopefully respond, overreact to this. and say, oh, you people are so awful, we ought to exterminate you or get rid of you, or actually undertake to utilize our high technologies to engage in a war with you. They're obviously tolerating this. It's like your little 1-year-old that you're carrying around is fascinated and starts pulling your hair, and you don't punch him in the face or anything. What you do is say, okay, that I'm here to help get you adjusted as you evolve into maturity. This is what's happening with us. We are in the process of having to establish a symbiotic relationship with this extraterrestrial civilization that is going to assist us in progressively moving into a higher and higher level of consciousness. We're going to start to, I believe, shed, not so much shed entirely, these lower chakra energy systems of our bodies, because as we all know, that all of the chakras have to be functioning in a fully healthy way in order for the full human being to manifest. So you don't just say, oh, I've got to cut off my first and second and third chakras, because I want to all be in the heart here, or I just want to be up in my sixth chakra. We've got to embrace all of them, and I think that this is symbolic of the fact that we have to embrace all of the different worldviews that our human family has, and understand that in isolation, any one of those worldviews, if it attempts to assert itself as the only worldview, is out of balance. Mm-hmm. And so that we have to try to understand what this balance is within us, each of us as human beings, and consult the knowledge, the esoteric knowledge that is in our human family about who we are and what the biophysical systems are that this vehicle that we're in right now is capable of doing performance-wise. And we need to consult some of the more Aboriginal communities that are more familiar with some of the practices that strengthen the balance in ourselves. I think this is extraordinarily exciting, in case I hadn't mentioned that before.
You've introduced the term ontological shock. And I hear it quite a bit lately. People being confronted with realities that are so vastly different than anything that they imagined was even possible. And for example, there's a new book, it's a few years old, by Robert Temple called A New Science of Heaven, and he's looking at plasma physics, and he's suggesting that all of these orbs that people are reporting, and in particular, a fellow named Chris Bledsoe on the East Coast sees thousands of these orbs, videotapes them, and maintains that there are living beings, intelligent beings inside the orbs. Well, apparently these orbs are plasmoids. They don't even have atoms or molecules. They're made out of ions, and they're completely non-biological. And it appears as if we're dealing with a life form that it does not rely on DNA and biology the way we're accustomed to. Robert Temple, the author of this book, points out that 99.9% of the entire universe is plasma, and he maintains that the real conscious entities, the extraterrestrial civilization, could be the sun. It could be clouds of nebulae in the galaxy that have the capability of self-organization into conscious beings, something vastly, vastly different than anything we're accustomed to.
There's the ontological phenomenon right there. That's the whole thing. The question as to how consciousness evolves from one condensed material manifestation into another is what ontology is all about, actually. The ontological question as to how consciousness interrelates with the material realm, how it relates to the physical, biological evolution of individual species in its material manifestation. This is the realm of ontology. And this is one of the four pillar questions that even Ralph Potter, for example, at Harvard University, teaches in the comparative social ethics, because the different worldviews are generated by different conclusions that they come to with regard to the ontological process, and as well as the cosmological process of how the universe came into being, the teleological process as to how it's unfolding, the epistemological process by means of which we discern truth in any way at all. I've just been asked to do a major documentary, a big 90-minute documentary, laying out the kind of undergirding beliefs of the worldviews and how they relate to the response we have to the UFO phenomenon. There's all kinds of extraordinarily exciting work that we all get to do here. That we've been a little bit like the voice in the wilderness, or the dog in the manger, trying to kind of tell people about this from the sidelines, while they're all playing, confrontational games with each other, from, Super Bowl football games to cage fighting, and we're trying to sit there and say, there's a better way here. There's a higher way that we can relate to each other and have people excited, so I think that our engagement with the academy, with the universities, is going to be extraordinarily important here. I know that the Sal Foundation is focusing on a lot of that, trying to prepare white papers, etc. My opinion is that we have to emphasize more of the metaphysical dimensions of this than just the technology, and that the universities need to look at, we need to get out our old Harvard University course catalog, this big tome that we have that looks like a Sears Roebuck catalog, and figure out how each of the different areas of scholastic expertise is going to be impacted by this. But the ontological study and the human biological studies are one of the primary ones that have to be addressed.
One of the videos that you promoted in your newsletter had to do with something called ARVs, Alien Reproduction Vehicles. And the implication was that these private corporations that the government has entrusted with captured UFOs have been able to create vehicles that simulate what the UFOs are like. And some of these supposedly have been capable of flying, capable of leaving the atmosphere, maybe even capable of traveling at close to light speeds. And when Jake Barber gave his lengthy interview, I had the impression that most of the work he was doing in the program was involving retrieving captured vehicles that were actually manufactured by humans, experimental vehicles that might crash.
I think that's true. I think that is true. They have a range. He talks about working on the range where they're going out to retrieve these things if they fall down. That's a very specific, restricted kind of activity that they're engaged in. And I've had long discussions for the 20 years that I was general counsel for the Disclosure Project with Stephen Greer. Dr. Greer had been trying to tell people for decades that, look, you're wrong if you think that they haven't been able to make some breakthroughs in looking at this technology, that some significant number of the craft that you see running around are not, in fact, extraterrestrial. They're human, that we have succeeded in doing some and capturing some of the technology, and that they've generated some of these vehicles now. And I've come to understand that that's true. I at the very beginning, I was being told that, oh no, they don't really know how to handle this. Their consciousness can't function. They can't make the machines work or anything like that. It's clear that they've jury-rigged, I think, some of the technology, and so that they can operate it more or less like a prosaic vehicle, even though it has some extraordinary capacities. Now, the other problem is, of course, that the fact that these vehicles are run by telepathic communication on the part of the pilot, that they were in fact having substantial difficulties in having the trained pilots that they have in the Air Force, for example, and in the Navy, that somehow they weren't capable of the kind of consciousness that was necessary to communicate and navigate these craft. And so what they did is they went out and they started trying to recruit people. As you point out, that they've actually gone and tried to find children who demonstrate these kind of psychic capabilities, and that they began a sub-program of psionics. This entire effort to try to gear up people who have these capabilities and recruit them to actually be pilots for these craft. And so that they could bring down the actual ET craft themselves, not a mock-up of them, or not something that's like them, but the actual craft themselves, and have young children be trained over years to learn how to fly these things because of the high levels of consciousness and psychic abilities that they've had. Now, I'm not at liberty to go into some of the details about this, because the means by which I've acquired this information puts certain people at risk of revealing who they are. But there have been some very substantial, misconduct involved in working with these children and trying to train them to fly these craft. And there have been some substantial misconduct with regard to the way they've treated the occupants of these craft, to the point of capturing them, killing them, subjecting them to all kinds of coercive activities. And our New Paradigm Institute is working with people in the Justice Department. Now, the Federal Justice Department, to try to bring about a major investigation to determine what some of those activities have been, so that we can purge those activities from the present system that they're working with. Okay, and that's a whole kind of darker dimension of this thing. But the bottom line is that that we're trying to be upward, positive, forward in this, and to reify the positive aspects of the program, to bring those forward, to stop the more malignant or malevolent aspects of the program that are products of the institutions, the national security state institutions that we've developed since World War II. That those have infected the program, and we've got to operate on the structures and remove those kind of malignancies from the program, which are very real. And that's where we want that to be a constructive process, okay, and not a destructive process. And we're not trying to demonize people. We're trying to say that this has just got to stop. We've got to have a more positive program here, and that therefore they're focusing on the psionic abilities, the capacities that people have to engage in telepathic communication, and precognition, and actually be able to transcend the potential limits of time. A very important issue here, of being able to get outside of the fourth dimension of time itself, and realize that all events are taking place all at the same time, as it were. This is something that people have a hard time grasping, but for reasons we can understand. But the bottom line is that the reason we've set up the New Paradigm Institute is to be able to house all of these issues and to compartmentalize some of the things, the studies that need to be done, and the reaching out to the universities, the reaching out to people inside the national security state bureaucracy, reaching out to people inside the Senate and the House of Representatives, reaching out to people inside the executive branch, reaching out to people in the Justice Department, for example. These are all things that we're doing at the New Paradigm Institute, and people are we've got over 1,000 people have contacted us, volunteering their services in these areas. So we're in the process of trying to get everything kind of organized and function in an effective and responsible way, and at the same time work with other organizations that are doing pieces of all of this, to not give them the impression that we're trying to co-opt what it is they're doing, or that we're trying to lord it over everybody. It's just that most everybody realizes that I've been involved in this program ever since 1977, and as hard as it is to believe that I've gotten to be one of the senior citizens of this movement just by dint of surviving. But we're trying to be responsible at the New Paradigm Institute, and we're working with people in the Sol Foundation, people in the UAP Disclosure Fund, the MUFON people, the people that run the conferences, the Conscious Life Expo, and that all of us need to work together to be able to demonstrate in practice to the extraterrestrial people that we're actually entitled or we're worthy of having a responsible relationship with them, even though we're still subject to some fairly primitive activities, that each of us has the responsibility to overcome that in ourselves. Each one of us has to be able to do this. Then we get into the issue of spiritual practice. That our human family, people have been trying to tell us or show us actually for centuries that there's a secret here, that our human physiology has capabilities that are so far beyond what the normal scientific, logical, positivist, materialist worldview acknowledges, that we need to listen. We need to look into those bodies of knowledge in those practices to help us strengthen ourselves so that we don't succumb to being over-dominated by just our lower chakra energies of personal survival, dialectical dominion, just the will to power. That these are things that we have to put into perspective and discover whether there's something unique that we can contribute to the galactic community. Is there something that we are really worthy of, some unique contribution that we can make? We hope so, because we want to be able to maintain a legitimate degree of agency over our own planet, but to participate in sharing the wealth of our planet, which is primarily life forms, flora and fauna that they might be wanting to harvest in some way, to seed other planets in our galaxy, to seed life elsewhere. This is an extraordinarily positive mission, that they may be engaged in. And at the same time, we need to be smart. We need to be aware of the fact that there may be some species in our galaxy that are still operating at less than an ideal balance among their chakras. Where they may have a bit of a will to power or dominion that we need to be cognizant of. But I'm sure that there's knowledge about this among other species in our galaxy. They can share this information with us, and that we can take this into account. It's just hard to overstate how exciting this whole period is, and how pregnant it is with potential for our human family. As long as we work together and we cooperate with each other, and that each and every one of us, is willing to be open to engaging in an exercise of our consciousness that expands and elevates our levels of consciousness so that we can achieve these tasks. That's it sounds like evangelism, but it is. Evangelism is sharing the good news. We're trying to share the good news that our human family is capable of so much more than we have demonstrated in the past. Each of us needs to be able to embrace that and know that it's true of ourselves, each and every one of us, every one of our organizations and institutions. And these institutions are going to have to be modified. They're going to have to evolve in a positive way to enable us to adjust to this new information that's going to be flowing in. We can't shut it off. We can't ignore it. We can't deny that it's real. We have to be able to absorb it and integrate it and move forward in the next phase of our human family. This is what we're engaged in at the New Paradigm Institute.
You've mentioned the Sol Foundation a few times. I understand that It was formed by Dr. Gary Nolan at Stanford University, a specialist in the immune system. And I understand he's particularly interested in medical examinations of people who may have been injured as a result of their contact with UFOs or UAP.
He has been contacted by elements within the national security state who have been engaged in confronting this phenomenon in a way that has put them into some physical proximity to some of these craft in a very antagonistic context. That they've been seeking to dominate them, shoot them down, invade them, break them open, and extract the people from in them. And some people have possibly encountered, adverse radiation from some of these exposures, also, or what we call radiation, but different frequencies of material. But also that we've always known from the very beginning of the space program that different types of germs and bacteria may have evolved in different star systems than ours, and that it would be devastating to our human body to ingest these. And there was great lengths that they went to at the beginning of the astronaut program to shield our astronauts against these kind of things. And so Dr. Nolan has been approached by the national security state and by different organizations in the national security state to engage in figuring out how to address these things. The challenge is that it's still in the context of a military operation, and so that we do have to be careful to protect our human family against exposure to things that may be damaging to us. But we have to try to get funding and programs operating that are independent of the military and the intelligence community, because you don't want to become part of that. You don't want to have to become part of that entire worldview in order to do things that are positive for our human family. So it's we've had these discussions before with the Sol Foundation, but they're perfectly desirous of having funding from other sources to be able to have this work be far less military oriented, and we support that.
Let's talk for a moment about the legal status of people that you refer to, the children, but I gather many of these psionic assets are recruited from other countries. They're young people. They're brought over here. I would imagine they have very little control over their own fate and fortune once they're brought here.
This is a challenge. The program began by trying to find younger children here inside the United States who were actually, interestingly, children of people in the military and in the intelligence community. They were trying to keep it in the family because of the security of the programs. And so that they were approaching the people that were involved in our military and in our intelligence community when they had children that seemed to be particularly gifted in this area. And they recruited them to come into the program and provide special training and stuff for them. And then it began apparently to expand out beyond that to other people in the United States, because they had some sense that if they confined their program to just people inside the United States, that it would be harder for the Chinese and Russians to realize we were doing it. A little naive, in my opinion, but the bottom line is, and then they realized that the Aboriginal people that had kept themselves apart from the Western culture, or had been compelled to stay apart from the Western culture, like the native people in our country on the reservations, had maintained these capacities to engage in direct communion with these other dimensions. And so that they began to look toward the reservations and the Aboriginal people within our own country. And then they said, oh, well, wait a second, look, Aboriginal people seem to be especially adept at this. What about those down in South America, in Central America? Because, that's all part of our domain, the Monroe Doctrine, that we're in control of Western civilization and Western Hemisphere. So then they began to focus in, Mexico and Central America, in the Aboriginal tribes in South America, and now they've begun to do the work over in Africa as well, in islands, Samoan Island, and in the islands in the Pacific. So it is true that they're expanding this program out, and that the safeguards that they provide to the autonomy and the fundamental human rights of people that are non-citizens of the United States, they always treat it differently. They don't somehow think that they're entitled to the same kind of safeguards and protections that they would have to provide to American citizens. This is a problem, and that we need to look into this. This is part of what in the Justice Department that we're working with, to try to determine, what the activities are that have gone on in that domain, what the rights are of the people that may have been abused, and how to remedy that, and how to compensate those people for that, and remedy whatever wrongdoing has been inflicted upon them. And that's where we're at right now.
Well, that sounds actually quite serious. I've also heard, there's so many rumors going around that some of these craft, I don't know whether we're talking about the ARVs or the captured vehicles, but that they have asked adult humans to try to pilot them. They're piloted apparently through conscious intention of some sort, and I've heard these adult humans were able to make some progress, but one of the problems they ran into was that the craft are involved in time travel, and that for a normal adult human, time travel makes one very dizzy, and the people who were initially recruited as pilots couldn't handle that.
Well, it's an interesting way that you've heard this. Yeah. Okay, that various of us have heard various things, depending upon the access we have to some of these programs. But the bottom line is that I can affirm that there have been some very serious problems with the regular trained pilots of our American military, because that's where they all come from. They all come from the United States Navy, F-18 Super Hornet fighter pilots, or Air Force trained people, and that they have a certain kind of rigid mindset that has been developed in them, and so it makes it especially difficult for these people to get into the more subtle dimensions of their consciousness. And so when they're pushed into a situation where they have direct contact with these vehicles, where that's sort of forced upon them, as you saw with Jake Barber, that this is a very disquieting experience, and that they become disoriented, they begin to have mental problems, and these translate into various psychological characteristics of the people, and they begin to suffer. But the reality is that it's become even more serious than that with some of the pilots. The care being taken for their own psychological health and for their physical health has been less than ideal inside those programs. And that was one of the reasons why they started looking to try to find younger children and train them and bring them up to be able to pilot these craft for them. But the problem is that they've also discovered that, I need to be careful here, but that they've engaged in the utilization of certain drugs, amphetamines and stuff, to hyperdose their own pilots and even some of these younger children. That have had extremely adverse consequences. This is part of what we're investigating now in cooperation with the Justice Department. We're trying to overcome some of the features of even our Justice Department, which is so designed for retribution or punishment. as a means of enforcing proper standards here. And we're trying to avoid doing that here because we're at one and the same time trying to be as compassionate and considerate as we can for people that have engaged in conduct that is highly questionable. But we also want to be thinking in terms of positive solutions for all of this. But there are some significant problems that have been encountered in this psionics program up to this point. And we're going to work with people that are coming into the new administration and new leadership that's going to be in the Justice Department and in the intelligence community and in the military and in the State Department to try to solve these problems.
Well, it strikes me from this conversation that we're dealing with ontological shock on many, many levels at once. Ontological shock that our government, whom we come to trust, has been behaving unethically and illegally. Ontological shock about the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations, ontological shock about the existence of psychic abilities, and finally, ontological shock about the possibility of time travel.
All true. all those are true. All those are true. And very importantly, the additional shock that the entire realm of organized religions and institutionalized religions on our planet may well have been a means by which information that's been gleaned in part by encounters with these phenomena have been codified in a way that is going to have to be subject to some substantial modification. Okay, and that the institutions are going to hold on and resist this, and so that those of us who are involved in advocating and promulgating the kind of changes that need to be made have to be, as I mentioned, very considerate about how difficult this is going to be for some of the guardians of these institutions. But at the same time, we cannot become part of a continued foot dragging and cover up of what it is that's gone wrong in the past. Okay, so this is going to be an extremely delicate balance that we have to strike here between compassion and making remedial steps that are real and not just subterfuges. As Father Davis, my superior at the Jesuit headquarters, used to say, when the changes become absolutely mandatory, the Catholic Church will always be able to say, as we have always taught, and they'll go right back to that thing, finding something in their background that shows that they were smart about this and they'd recognize this, and they're just going to bring it to the fore right now. But you see the kind of conflict that's going on in the Catholic Church, between the reactionaries and the progressives right now. I mean, the Opus Dei people and the Knights of Malta and all these people that are some of their more aggressive and stratified and solidified institutions inside the church are basically beside themselves over the fact that the first Jesuit, Francis, has been now selected as the Pope. And they're basically catatonic over some of the steps that have been taken by Francis to try to bring the church not only up into the 20th century, which was the purpose of Vatican II, but to now bring them into the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to have to play some significant leadership role in Western civilization, and as in the Protestant fundamentalists are going to have a significant set of problems with this. But again, we have to be compassionate to understand that they've been led into some of the positions that they're maintaining by institutions, and that the institutions have to be changed, and therefore some of their own personal beliefs are going to have to be changed. So that's what, again, the New Paradigm Institute is working at, trying to establish positive relations with every one of these different institutions that we can, all across the political spectrum, all across the political spectrum and all across all the worldviews. And people are going to say to us, well, how can you, and they have said to us, how can you possibly be willing to talk to anybody, inside the military? Because all the military exists for is to conquer natural resources for the major corporations. You say, that's been the downside of some of the military thinking and some of the intelligence community thinking. But we have to salvage the positive parts of our institutions and mature them. That's what we have to do now. And it's not going to be easy. But the fact is, we are all blessed. We are all blessed to have been born, or I guess this incarnation of us, where we are right now in this incarnation, is going to be one of the most exciting and productive incarnations that we've ever had. And so that it's going to be helpful for us to be able to recall as best we can the lessons that we have learned in previous incarnations. Each individual one of us, as well as our culture, is going to have to understand all of these things, because this is going to be not only the most exciting, but one of the most challenging transitions that our human family has ever had to undergo. And I think we just focus on the positive and exciting parts of it, and be devoted collectively to overcoming the challenges that we're going to encounter. But take heart that every single time you encounter a problem with one of our other fellow human beings, you have to just go to a place of overcoming the problem, of not confronting them, not insulting them, not demonizing them, not engaging in some sort of a dialectical confrontation with them or shaming them, that we have to transcend all of that while still not succumbing to giving into, allowing any of the malfeasance that we've engaged in because of our lack of insight to continue. That's what we have to do.
Well, I hear almost daily from somebody who says that anything having to do with the paranormal, whether it's UFOs or spirit communication, is the work of the devil. And then some of the more intelligent people who hold that point of view say, take a look at the abductions, take a look at the people who claim they've been impregnated and then their fetus was stolen from out of their body. They're obviously engaged in demonic kinds of activities.
Yeah, no, that's a big one. That is a big one, and it doesn't really do any good just simply to say, well, look how we treat chimpanzees, and look how we treat other animals and life forms, when we go experimenting on them and using them for testing and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't work. It doesn't cause them to go, oh yeah, I guess you're right. This is a worldview issue. And so once you come to understand that what we've got to get down to is dealing with the fact that we as a human family have not been able to come up with any definitive answer to either the cosmological question of the source of our origins of our universe. We haven't been able to come up with really a clear understanding of what the ultimate outcome and direction of our universe is really going to be. We haven't been able to figure out secrets of ontology and how consciousness plays a role in the ongoing teleological evolution of our species. And we certainly haven't yet figured out how to determine exactly what's true and what isn't. I mean, especially in this time with artificial intelligence, in photoshopping, and that you could be talking right now to an AI entity instead of me. That they would have been able to just capture some of my voice and some of my visuals, and you could be talking to an AI being right now. You're not, but on the other hand, even if you were, they'd be telling you that you're not. And so you get an idea of how difficult this epistemological period is that we're in, about how do we discern truth amidst all of this. And that's one of the things the New Paradigm Institute is trying to do, is say, look, we need to try to make certain that the things that we're saying are absolutely clearly accurate. Okay? It may not be proposing answers to some questions that we don't really have a definitive answer to yet, But I think one of the key insights is to understand that each of the octave of different human worldviews that we have that are characterized in the political realm as from the right to the left is authoritarian and reactionary and conservative and moderate and liberal and progressive and utopianist. These are characteristics of worldviews that we hold, but the differentiation between the adherence to one or another is predicated upon the assumptions they make about these four fundamental questions of the origins of the universe, the cosmological question, the teleological question of the end result of the present functioning of the cycles of our universe. Thirdly, the ontological question, the relationship between consciousness and the materialization of consciousness into material forms, and then this fundamental epistemological question of how you go about determining truth. That the conclusion, the operating conclusion, even if unconscious, that each individual comes to about those four questions goes into making up a worldview. So, but just by giving them some additional facts on some ancillary issue doesn't move them at all. So that this is a challenge, but we at least know this. We know this about our human family, and so we have to take that into account. So that we take that into account when we're dealing with a person to realize you can't just tell them, say, here, look at this information, look at this evidence that's here, because it is so contrary to their worldview that they cannot allow it to come in. They can't accept it. That is what most people are referring to when they're referring to just ontological shock, is I can't let this information in as real because it is so disruptive to the fundamental unconscious belief systems that I have that I'll be lost. I'll be at sea. I won't know how to navigate in my normal world. So this is how challenging this issue is, and that why we have to exercise such care and sophistication in knowing how to get this information shared with our people and integrated into our institutions. This is an extraordinary challenge, but if it were easy, someone else would have already done it.
Well, when I first spoke to you last summer, I asked you about reports, particularly promulgated on the Gaia network by a fellow named Corey Goode, that we already have a secret base on Mars, and we have vehicles that can travel back and forth at least to Mars, if not elsewhere in the solar system. And you were very skeptical about that, even, I would say, hostile, as am I. But when we talk about the ARVs and the possibility that they're engaging in travel close to light speed and possibly engaging in time travel, and the suggestion that they do leave the planet, I begin to wonder if you're having any second thoughts about that.
Well, it's interesting. I don't have any second thoughts about Corey Goode, or Wilcox and those guys that got into complete conscious fantasizing and fictionalizing about all of that. But it is more so that people like Linda Moulton Howe has now started to believe that some of this is true. So I'm going to be seeing her. I'm going to be seeing her next weekend. I'm going to be talking with her more about this. But that my personal information, at least at this stage, is that are the people that have been involved out of the national security state, in the military and in the intelligence communities, their consciousness is at such a level that they've had such problems with really mastering this particular realm, that they have not, in fact, engaged in venturing out into the realms that you're talking about. That's why they're still getting all these crashes that are taking place, that they need to have people like Jake Barber, be able to go out and recover the craft, because they're trying to fly around. They've got the big base at Sedona. There's one, another major underground base outside of Sedona, in that they're experimenting now. They're trying to fly these things around, and they're flying them around inside our atmosphere. I don't have any doubt that they're capable of mimicking UFO activity, genuine UFO activity. But I don't believe that they've actually mastered this adequately. to be engaged in building a base on the opposite side of the moon, or going to Mars already. They're knocking on the door. That they are. They're knocking on the door of this, and that's why some people who start getting little bits of this information recklessly, in my opinion, project it out sort of arithmetically into the future of what it might look like, and then they try to pretend it's true. But I don't believe it is. At this point, I do not believe that yet. And we're trying to be very careful about this at the New Paradigm Institute, because some people are going to be critical of us by saying, you're not going far enough. You're not going far. And so I would just because I find it to be so helpful. One of the first things that we were taught, in evidence by Lawrence Tribe at Harvard Law School, he tells the very famous story about Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was a very noted Harvard jurist and Supreme Court justice, that he was such a workaholic. He used to work 7 days a week, and his wife got really upset about this. And one spring morning back in the 1890s, or whenever it was that he was the Supreme Court justice, she packed up a picnic lunch on a Sunday and hooked up the buckboard and went over to the Congress building where the Supreme Court was still at that time. And she made him come out and come on a picnic. And she got him out into the buckboard, and they were going out into the Virginia countryside. And as they were going along, she looked over and she said, "Oh, look, Ollie, someone has shorn all the wool off all those sheep over there." And Oliver Wendell Holmes turned and looked at them, and he turned back to her and said, "No, my dear, the most that we can say is somehow the wool has been removed from at least the side of the sheep that we can see." At which point she turned the buckboard back around and kicked him out and sent him back to work and went and ate the lunch herself. And so the tribe tells the story because if you're going to be extraordinarily cautious, and you're going to say just those kind of things step by step as they teach people in the law to do, but the bottom line is it's 99.9% probable that someone has shorn all the wool off all those sheep over there. Okay? That's what we've got to come to deal with here. We've got to carefully be able to make surmise about things based on the data that we have, and we want to try to get as many data points as we possibly can before we start to kind of solidify this into some sort of operating theory. And we have to also recognize the difference between a theory or a hypothesis and a theory and a fact. So, we can't get too esoteric about this, but I think people can appreciate the care that has to be exercised here, especially before you start condemning someone who believes some kind of theory that you might consider to be speculation. And you can't just attack them and say, "Oh, they're completely wrong," or, and so you have people set up camps inside the UFO community and inside the spiritual community, inside the political community all the time, where they want to lock down on one particular thesis and they want to condemn and demonize those who don't agree with them. This is a quality of our human family that we have to learn to transcend here. If we're going to be able to establish a trustworthy relationship with an extraterrestrial civilization that may have 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion years of further research into these areas, okay? And yet at the same time, we have to be very careful, and I want to emphasize, of not just sort of accepting whatever it is they say about reality. And therefore, we succumb to them, and we lose all of our agency, So that's this extraordinarily interesting period that we're in. And it's a challenge. We should all enjoy the challenge, to warm to the challenge, and share our opinions about these things with each other. That's what we're doing here.
Well, I know you've used the phrase "our human family" many times in the course of our conversation, and I'm beginning to see how important that is to your work. If we're going to begin to encounter a non-human civilization, we have to be able to, I should think, represent ourselves, the human collective, as a single entity.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. Our species is our species. We have very positive features and some still undeveloped features. We have some sort of a sense of where we may well be going teleologically and unfolding. But the bottom line is we have to try to have it's a lot of people don't have good family life. No, I refer to our human family. Some people aren't even talking to their brothers and sisters, or they haven't talked to their father or uncle or something for 10 years. So we still have these challenges that we experience inside our own nuclear families. But what we have to begin to do is to see as a species, we have to come to some sort of a collective sense of ourselves. Okay? If we're going to be able to have an effective and productive relationship with a species that is categorically different from us. And yet, it's clear that there are some extremely important similarities, at a minimum, between ourselves and some of the other species that we've encountered. That these are bipeds. These have a 2 legs and 2 arms and trunk and a head and eyes and ears. That virtually all of the 5 different species that have been talked about a lot by people who've encountered them have these features about them, and therefore it's easier for us to relate to them in some way. And what we have to do is look at it that way, because we're still at a primitive point where when people come upon another human being and that person is white instead of black, or is dark brown instead of white, that we rivet upon their differences instead of saying, look, this is a regular human being. They're intelligent and spiritual and love their children and we're all human beings. And so we have to try to get past this thing of fixating on the differences between ourselves and focus on the positives, and also realize that that like 98% of our DNA is the same as chimpanzees, and to have a much more benign attitude toward the other living beings on our planet, to understand that we evolved from a common source, and that it's true that the beings from another star system do in fact originate from the same source as us, which is this universe. Okay, so these are our universal sisters and brothers, but we have to be able to recognize our own sisters and brothers, our own parents, our own fellow human beings, and ratify their bona fides and their absolute value. Okay, so this is a task that has been historically viewed as a religious task, as a spiritual task of being able to evolve to a state of consciousness where you perceive the commonality of others and other life forms and nature itself. And this is, of course, the Aboriginal secret, is that they fully realize and recognize their organic relationship to the physical universe, and it's a much greater reality in their life. So we have to reinfuse a reinvigorated sense of religion, relegaro, the relinking of our human consciousness back into the material origins of our physical body that we have, and welcome this and say, we don't have to be afraid of nature. We don't have to be afraid of other life forms on our planet. We don't have to be afraid of other life forms in our galaxy. This is a spiritual mission ultimately, and the reality is, I don't think there's going to be any way to avoid that. People are going to try to avoid being characterized. Oh, this is some kind of a spiritual trip. That people are already saying that about the new paradigm. Oh, this is some kind of a weird spiritual operation. I guess they shouldn't be surprised, since I came from Jesuit headquarters, working on this issue. I haven't attempted to disguise it at all, but I think that this is ultimately a spiritual undertaking on our part. And other people may refer to it as supernatural. But the vast majority of people on our planet believe that there is an actual supernatural dimension, and they're interested in integrating it in their life. And I hope that we can all succeed in doing that as we reach out to the stars here.
And you've got some hardcore military folks like Jake Barber and his friend Fred Baker who subscribe to the idea that there's something very sacred about this communication.
Yeah, and they're all realizing that. They're all encountering it. Lou Elizondo recognizes that. Stephen Greer recognizes that. Steve Bassett recognizes that. Linda Moulton Howe recognizes all that. Paul Hynek recognizes all that. Nick Pope, all of our people, James Fox, all of our people working in this particular area recognize that this has a distinct spiritual dimension. And that's how they perceive it. And so that we have to open ourselves to welcoming this. There are some people, profound religious fundamentalists, who view it as a spiritual issue, but they're so locked into the dialectic that they believe that there's a satanic dimension to the other beings, and it's a fear that they have, and we're going to have a special apostolate, if you will, to reach out to them and try to get them to overcome this. And that very effort on our part, they view as a threat, that we're actually we're kind of spies or something, or foreign agents for a foreign power of some sort. And I'm hoping that we can overcome this. We have to be able to overcome it inside the Catholic Church. We have to be able to overcome it inside for example, in the Baptist Church. There are whole different sections of those. The Episcopal Church has a lot of these issues. So we have to be able to overcome this internal warring with ourselves, and come to embrace this. And as we progress in this, I think the extraterrestrial beings are going to say, good, okay, now they're making progress. They're making progress. We can open ourselves to them much more. We can reach out to them in a much more obvious way. We can begin to have more formalized relations with us. And I'm hoping we're going to be able to do this at an accelerated rate here, because it's definitely upon us. This is definitely the time has arrived. The time that all of us for the last 80 years, we sort of marked that point from 1947. In 1945, at the end of World War II, when all this national security state stuff started. But from 1947, with at least the crash of the Roswell crash, there's been this very aggressive program on the part of the United States national security state to lie about this and conceal this out of a fear that they're not going to be able to navigate this change. But very important, to the extent to which it's just that they're adhering to maintaining the people in institutions in power that are presently in power on the planet. That we have to have a higher vision of what it is the mission of our human family really is. And so I think that we're going to succeed in doing this.
Well, Danny Sheehan, what a pleasure for me to have this conversation with you at this moment in time and to be able to share it with our audience. I'm very grateful you were able to take the time to be with me.
Terrific, Jeffrey. Anytime, every day, anytime you'd like.
Well, good, because the information is coming at us fast and furious, so I'm looking forward to many more conversations with you.
Fantastic. Let's do it.
Thank you, and for those of you watching or listening, thank you, because you are the reason that we are here.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue number 8 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine or order a beautiful printed copy, go to newthinkingaloud.org.